Good evening, and welcome to Burley Fisher, virtual Burley Fisher in my front room for another episode of virtual Burley Fisher in my front room. Tonight we are launching Lairies by Steve Hollyman. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Steve's book and tell you a little bit about Ben Halls, who Steve's going to be in conversation with. And then we're going to have a conversation between Steve and Ben. And then at the end, we'll be taking questions from anyone who's watching. So please don't hesitate to ask questions as and when they occur to you, just using the comment function on YouTube. And then we'll kind of pick them up and deal with them all at the end. So Lairies is the brilliant and beautiful debut from Steve Hollyman, mapping the lives of violent young men at the start of the 21st century, living aimlessly but desperately, hunting for purpose. It follows Sean after he wakes up in hospital after a fight in a local nightclub to discover that his girlfriend has been assaulted. The book tracks Sean's attempts to piece together the events of that night and to figure out how it came to this. Nicholas Royal, author of Ornithology, says that Lairies is like if Anthony Burgess and Chuck Palahniuk went on a pub crawl in the 21st century Britain, got out of their heads and decided to write a book together. So Steve is going to be in conversation with Ben Halls, whose debut short story collection, The Quarry, was published by Dialogue last year. Glenn Brown, author of Ionopolis, said of the collection that Halls's short stories show that even in zero-hour, austerity-battered Britain, the tenderness and warmth of human connection exists. It is, in the end, a testament to this messy truth, how love, hate, hope, and fear have always lived on the same street. So, without any further ado, I will hand over to Steve and Ben.
Thank you. Steve, can I just say before we get in, congratulations. How are you feeling? It's a big achievement.
Thanks very much, man. It feels surreal. It feels kind of exactly how I expected it to feel, and also nothing like I expected it to feel. Yep. It's just weird, middle of a pandemic. It's been a long time coming. I've been waiting for this book to get out there for ages. So it feels great.
At least on Monday, people can get out, hit up Burley Fisher and your other local independents and pick up a copy.
Totally.
And of course, you can get signed copies on Burley Fisher's website right now. Okay, to dive kind of straight in, I just want to start talking a little bit about where the book came from for you, because some stories start with an idea for a beginning and ending, maybe just a character or a pivotal scene. For you, what was the thing that started Lairies off in your mind?
Well, it kind of developed over quite a long period of time. I think that the idea had been stewing away for a while, and then I remember I was out on a stag night in Sheffield with a group of mates, and I was going because my kind of scene wasn't really going to nightclubs and stuff. I preferred going to gigs and that type of thing. So it was quite unusual for me to be out on the town in that way. But as I was sort of on that stag party, walking around, seeing what was going on, taking in, the sights and the sounds and the smells, I started to think, oh God, it's horrible, isn't it really? This sort of nightlife that was going on at that time. And I ended up, seeing groups of lads, messing about, kicking off, being Larry, basically.
Yep.
And I ended up thinking, wouldn't it be nice if there was somebody who would, step in and have a word with these people? And I ended up, as you do, as the old cliche goes, writing the idea on this cigarette packet. And then I had that, it stayed in my mind for a while. And then, in the intervening years, I started to work on it, writing key scenes, and it just came from there. But it really just came out of what I was seeing when I was out myself,
Yeah. So it's interesting you say that. You talk about wishing someone would step in. When you started, did you mean Adi and Colbeck to be more explicitly heroes of the piece?
Yeah, I think so. So, I mean, it was kind of about trying to get readers on their side. But at the same time, when I was writing it, I don't think I ever really expected there to ever be readers. So it wasn't necessarily a conscious choice, but the superhero motif to it I think is very, very apt, because essentially what Aid and Colbeck are doing, certainly at the start, is they're fighting the bad guys. You know, they're sort of, all of us have been sitting on a bus, or we've been out somewhere, or in a restaurant, or on the tube, or in a club, or in a bar, and somebody has been acting up. And I think all of us, yeah, exactly. All of us have wanted to, you know, to step in, but most of us wouldn't dare. You know, I certainly wouldn't half the time, or most of the time. And but Colbeck and Aid will, and so they are kind of like the superheroes. But then, of course, by doing that, what hopefully happens is the reader becomes sort of implicated in their quest, or the consequences of their actions as it moves on.
Yeah, because this is something I find so interesting with these two, because they do some quite awful things, but at the same time, I think before you see those, I could very easily be at least mates with them down the pub. You know, the kind of people are on first name terms with. Did you do, especially in the later stages of the book, anything to kind of explicitly bring that humanness and that niceness out of them, or did you find kind of that duality of them completely organic?
Well, I think it was organic, really, because I mean, what started to happen is when I started to write the book, my intention was really to poke fun at a certain type of male, and for it to be satirical and a little bit frivolous. But then as I started to
Oh no.
I think
I just lost you there, Steve. I don't know if that is you or me that dropped out.
I can still see you. Everything's fine, man.
Oh, okay. I'm afraid I didn't hear that answer, but we are going to press on, and I will email you about it later. Just because I talked a bit about how things emerge, I just want to go on to Sean, who's, you know, our unfortunate person who we meet in a hospital bed, and there is a very, it'll become obvious to readers, but I don't want to give anything away. There is a very big split with this character. While being sensitive to the plot, I just want to know, like, how that character came about, how Sean came about, and kind of as much as you can give why you presented him in that way, because I found it absolutely fascinating, man.
Yeah. So the thing with the Sean part of the narrative came later. So when I started writing it, it was all Colbeck, Aid, Dunk, and Sorrel. It was their story.
Okay.
And the way that I wrote it really was, again, because I didn't know how to write a novel. You know, I was just guessing as I went along, really. And so the obvious way for me to do it was to write the scenes that interested me the most. So the action scenes where they're fighting, the monologues, so the bits where you're in the characters' heads a little bit more, and the bits where they're having conversations and a bit of banter. And so what I was left with was just all these scenes that were kind of starting to link together, and certain threads were starting to come out. And then I had a choice, and I thought, well, if I want to turn this into a proper novel, into a proper narrative, either I've got to write connecting material that joins all these bits together, or I've got to splice something else in there. And I chose the latter, because to do the former to me would have been like when a band puts an album out and they've got like 5 good songs, and then they stick a load of filler in there. I thought, I've got these good chapters. And the idea was that that it's almost like 2 novels in one, and that there are very subtle links between the different narratives. And of course they do at certain points cross over, and eventually they completely converge. But what I was trying to do was to just keep it interesting and not have to write a load of filler. And then I thought, well, it would be really interesting if, and I don't really think that this is a spoiler, because it's revealed quite early on, but, you know, Tag and Sean, sorry, are the same people, or the same person. And I just thought it'd be really interesting to show this split between the different sides of a personality. So who somebody is when they're completely off the face and out with the mates, versus who somebody is when all of that is stripped away. And of course, what Tag is trying to do, or what Sean is trying to do, is keep the 2 sides of his personality completely separate He's trying to keep one side of his personality is when he's with his mates. The other side of his personality is who he is when he's with his girlfriend and his parents and whatever. But after the accident or the assault or the incident that drives the plot of the novel, those two sides of his personality are brought together, and he can't escape that fact. And he literally can't escape that fact because he's lying in a hospital bed, and he can't move. And so that's what I was trying to do, and that's where all of that came from. But it evolved in a way where I was trying to just keep the novel interesting and not have to put filler bits in. And I think that's why there's so much sort of packed into it, and it is hopefully almost all action.
No, and it definitely worked, because I completely buy into that music analogy, and I know you've got a music background, and you can sometimes see that in books. And I can, Lairies, it has obviously changes of pace, but it doesn't let you off. You don't sit there going like, well, the writer just needs to get from A to B here. I do want to cycle back to something you said, though, about these two sides. You've got Sean and Tag, and kind of with all of them, because a lot of these characters do have a certain amount of duality to them. Like, Aid is hyper violent, but he does care. He is, well read, well educated, and even at times, poor little Duncan can seem like he's two different people. And I'd be interested to know your opinion on kind of what this says about the effects of, like, drink and drugs and the pressure to go out to clubs and get laid on men, and how you found that played out through these characters.
Well, I think that obviously you can't really read this book now without referring to what we now call toxic masculinity. I think that it's blatantly obvious that really that is what this book is about. However, when I was writing it, because a lot of this book, the majority of this book, was written quite a long time ago, and the term toxic masculinity at the time, as far as I am aware, was not really part of, common parlance, as it were. And so I had to come up with a word for the type of person that I was referring to. Now, there were a lot of, I guess, kind of synonyms I could have used that were about at the time, like yob, chav, trendy, towny, hooligan, whatever. But none of them were really accurate enough for the specific type of person that I was looking for. So that's where I came up with this term Lairies, which, because I've seen the word Larry used as an adjective before, but not as a noun. And I think that the way that the novel works is, of course, you've got Colbeck and Aid, who claim to hate these people, and yet as they sort of move through their story, and as their characters start to develop, it becomes obvious that they're actually exhibiting a lot of the behavior that they claim to detest, especially Colbeck. So for Colbeck, it's kind of, it's almost as if he's thinking to himself, well, if masculinity is always toxic, then what does it mean to be a good guy? So it's almost like he's feeling that he has to choose what type of misogynist he wants to be. And it's like the type of misogynist that, gropes a girl in a nightclub or something like that. He's like, oh, no, I'm not that sort of person. And he will fight back against those people. But the type of person who hates women because his ex-girlfriend happens to be one, he's fine with that. And so there's this constant sort of a dichotomy, as you said, and these opposing sides, especially to Colbeck's character. And of course, as you move through the novel, that is his undoing. It really, really is his undoing.
Would you define that? Because there are times when Aid and Colbeck are definitely more goading in sort of, they're not just sort of stood on the edge of a club looking for a Larry. They can try and go and provoke people to be Larry towards them. So is that kind of behavior more rooted in their sort of fragility, what's the term, fragile masculinity? And is that what's kind of driving that behavior? And do you see that driving the behavior of guys?
Maybe. I mean, I think that with Colbeck and Aid, it kind of starts out as there's an ideology behind this violence. So for Colbeck and Aid, and particularly for Aid, because Colbeck really just follows Aid, but for Colbeck and Aid, really, it's about they feel that they are morally superior to the people that they are going after, the people that they're reprimanding. Now, for Aid, it basically stays like that all the way through, this sense of moral superiority and the idea that what he is doing is meting out justice. And that's where the satisfaction for Aid comes from. But for Colbeck, he kind of realizes that basically he just enjoys kicking the shit out of people, you know. And so that's why, of course, Aid has these rules where you can't, you can only intervene in something that you've already seen start in. You know, you can't start on somebody or that sort of thing. But for Colbeck, it becomes about deliberately putting himself in situations where people might start on him and then actually starting on people. You know, so again, it's kind of, I think that the person that deviates from the original cause the most is certainly Colbeck. And then in the middle, you've got Duncan, who ironically is the one whose actions really end up being the most catastrophic, you know. And yet he's the one who all the way through has been a pacifist, has been chilled out, keeps his head down. If he sees a group of, you know, little 14-year-old scallies, he'll cross the road. He doesn't want any trouble. He'll keep his head down. He's very shy. And yet he's the one who ends up totally flipping out.
Yeah, I am going to circle back more to masculinity in a second, but talking about Duncan,
right?
I just love to know more about him, more where he came from, because obviously Aid and Colbeck are such big personalities. They do dominate the narrative of the book. But Duncan gets equal, if not more, page time. He is just such, I can't wait for your readers to meet him, man. He is such a delightful little character. And he's such a nice contrast to Aid and Colbeck. So I'd really like to know, so where did he come from? Because obviously you didn't imagine him like thinking about Lairies on the bus mouthing off. So I'd just love to know like where he came from and what you were going for with him. Well,
I think that, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's this really is Duncan's story, you know.
Yeah.
It's kind of his tale, if you like. And I think that if you want to look at, you know, the mechanics of how a novel works, his job is to kind of be the surrogate for the reader to sort of take them through. And he has something that the other characters don't have because he has hindsight, because the way that his character, the way that his voice is put together is that he is narrating in the past tense from a sort of unspecified vantage point, slightly in the future. So he can see the full picture as he's telling you his story, and he knows what happens. Whereas the other three narrators, they're narrated in the present tense. So the idea is that obviously the reader doesn't know what's going to happen on the next page, but neither does the character, because it's narrated in the present tense. And so you're right there in the moment. And for Duncan, it's different. But I think that I just needed something I needed a voice of reason, really. Because even though Duncan hasn't been to university and he's naive and he's not as experienced in various aspects of his life, and he's never really had a job, and, you know, Aidan and Colbeck run circles around him and take the piss out of him all the time and whatever. He's kind of, in many ways, he's the one that speaks the most sense, you know, and he's not afraid to hold his own and, you know, challenge Aid and, you know, argue against Aid. And, you know, he's kind of, he's able to do that because he knows that he can get away with it, because to Aid, he's not seen as a threat. So Aid's never going to flip and do anything to Duncan, because Duncan's just like this little skinny, weedy guy, not unlike myself. And so he can just, you know, he can basically say what he wants to Aid. And as a result of that, he sort of bounces off Aid and he can sort of guide the reader through the story. And that's what he's designed to do.
Well, it's interesting because I think, I mean, obviously don't want to go too much into the plot, but I read their dynamic more. Aid chose him because he saw a blank page in Duncan. And maybe he could see a new disciple. Because I said this to you when we chatted the other week. Like, in a different life, Aid could be a cult leader. He could be Jim Jones, man. Like, and I always read that relationship as more Aid saw Duncan as someone he could imprint on. Maybe convert.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely some truth in that, because, you know, and I think the reason you're saying that is because he's always trying to get Dunk to read his books, isn't he? You know, he's always trying to get him to talk about, I don't know, Plato's Republic or something like that, and always trying to get him to, improve his mind and do crosswords and, all this sort of stuff. So maybe he does see Duncan. He certainly sees Duncan as being naive, but I think that it's more the fact that, he sees Duncan as somebody who is likely to be impressed by his pseudo intellectual rants about, Western philosophy and various other things, literature, whatever. So that's kind of what it is. I think it's kind of having Dunk around, who he sees as less intelligent, makes him feel more intelligent.
Yeah. Before we move on very quickly, you were speaking just then about voices, how Duncan's in recent past tense, the rest's in present tense. I know we chatted about this in sort of very nerdy, writerly ways the other day. I just want to talk about Colbeck's voice very quickly because, I've said this to you a couple of times now. Colbeck's voice is second person, so it starts with you. You do this, you do that, you feel this. And in all of my knowledge, I can only think of 2 second person voices which work, which is the Junot Diaz story, How to Date a Harpy, and The Ones Who Walk Away from the Omelas by Ursula Le Guin. I think they both won Pulitzers, or 2 titans of writing.
Yeah.
So I would just love to know very quickly why you chose Colbeck second person and what you think that adds to this character who you get such a great insight with off it.
Well, the answer to that question is not going to be as impressive as I wish it was, but I'll be candid. So when I was writing this, I've got 4 different narrators. They're all men. They're all roughly the same age. They all live in the same town. They're all narrating their own version of the same events or the same lead up to the same event. And so I had to make them distinct, because I wanted it to be the case that even though at the start of each chapter, it tells you who's narrating that chapter. So at the start of chapter 1, it says chapter 1, Duncan. I wanted people to be able to flick to any page and know who was telling that part of the story.
Yeah.
So it was about making them distinct. And one of the ways that I did that, as I said, was to make Duncan be narrating in the past tense. And another way that I did it was to put Colbeck in the second person tense, because the thing with second person is that for me, even though it is a bit unusual, and I can only think of a couple of novels really that I've read that use it, for me, it seems to come very naturally. And I find it far easier than writing in the third person, which is a lot more common, but I just don't seem to be able to do it. I find it's just kind of my go-to place is to write from the second person. But what I started to realize once I started to play with Colbeck's narrative in this way is that it did 2 things. First of all, it put the reader into Colbeck's head a little bit, but it also put Colbeck into the reader's head, which is worse. It's way worse, and it's a little bit unsettling. And a few people have told me that it's played with the heads a little bit. And of course, the point of that is that you're going along with Colbeck. You are Colbeck really, because as you're reading it, it's saying you do this, you do that, and so you're far more culpable in the eventual outcome of his actions. You're implicated in it more. And what I was trying to do really was to write it in a way that after a while you stop noticing that it's in second person. And I hope that I've done that, because there's long sections of dialogue where, because the dialogue's not necessarily attributed in the traditional way it would be, you start to forget that it's in second person. And it opened up this entirely new set of possibilities for what I could do with that character. But it didn't start off as anything that complicated. It started off as just trying to keep them distinct.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah, I can say it worked. And I think it really worked for Colbeck, because I found him as a character to have huge emotional intelligence, but precisely 0 coping skills at what he could do with, And so I think that second person voice, people are really going to enjoy. I do want to cycle. I'm glad we've spoken a bit about the books. I didn't just want to talk about masculinity, toxic masculinity, and to drone on about that for an hour because, you know, who needs that on a Thursday? But I do want to talk about masculinity. But before I do that, I think something which is really important is that when I was writing The Quarry, which, you know, like Lairies has all male narrators, it really looks at masculinity. I put a lot of conscious thought into writing the women of my world, because I feel it discredits what you're trying to say about men and masculinity if your non-male characters are flat, they're not well-rounded, and they don't work. So kind of off the back of that, I'd love to know how you created characters like Steph and Sorrel, and was it a similar creative process? Were they based off, you know, people you knew, or characters you based off people you saw on night out, and kind of how you rounded them out?
Yeah, good question. I don't think that they were. I don't think that they were based on people that I knew, either of them, really, unless it was some kind of amalgamation of different people that I knew, maybe. What I do know is that when I was originally writing it, Steph definitely had a narrative strand. You know, there were chapters written from Steph's point of view. Okay. Don't think there were for Sorrel, but there might have been. And for some reason, and I can't actually remember what my reasoning for this was, it didn't seem to work. And so I took them out. And so that, of course, what that means is that you only ever see Steph and Sorrel through the eyes of whoever is narrating whatever interaction is taking place with them. And it's the same for Aid. And the reason that I did that is in Aid's case, was to create a kind of enigma around this character of Aid. As you say, he could be a cult leader, you know, people follow him. Why? We don't really know, because he chats shit a lot of the time, you know. Whereas with Steph and Sorrel, it was a little bit different. I don't know if it was the fact that I didn't feel comfortable trying to write authentically from the female viewpoint when I was putting those chapters together, or if something just didn't work. But essentially what I was trying to do was make them as believable as possible. And I think that it turned out when I was writing it, that the way to make them most believable was to have them explained by other characters that were interacting with them, really. And Sorrel, of course, is there to Sorrel is there really to be Duncan's sidekick, you know, because Duncan can talk to Sorrel about things that he can't really talk to Aidan Colbeck about, and Sorrel really encourages Duncan in lots of different ways and gives him the notebook that he ends up writing his chapters in, for example. And you know, I think that because Duncan is so naive and so shy and so harmless, really, the fact that he fancies Sorrel, you know, and the fact that he goes on about how much he fancies her, we don't really see that in a misogynistic light, because it's kind of innocent. He's kind of in awe of her. He won't dare tell her how he feels. He's really, really uncomfortable around her and socially awkward. And I think that kind of, it makes us like Duncan more, I think, when we see how he acts towards Sorrel.
I definitely got strong flashbacks to when sort of like I was 18 and I didn't, you know, I was trying to understand like dating relationships with women, and I had no bloody clue. I'm still not entirely sure I do. You're right, is that slight puppy dogness. But they do still have, you know, like strong agency, and Steph, especially, although you never see her on the page, you know, I can piece together. I'm not going to say anything because obviously I want to keep things for readers. I can definitely see her motivations. I can see how she's gotten from A to B. Do you think that by having, even though they got discarded, having these sections written from their perspectives helped you make sure, even though they were in the background, they were fully formed in the background?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you know, there's a lot of stuff that when I was writing this that was necessary for me to write, but it was not necessary for it to be actually in the finished novel. And I because the way that I wrote it was you know, was it Hemingway said, write drunk, edit sober? I think I wrote drunk and edited drunker, to be honest, you know. And the way that I wrote it was basically just sit and write as quickly as possible. You know, I was aiming for 1,000 words a day. I used to go down to the pub with my laptop after work, and I could do 1,000 words in about 45 minutes. You know, it sounds like a lot, but it's not that much. But what I was doing was writing very, very quickly and just trying to get it down onto the page, then edit it after. And so what that meant was, it meant that my word count accumulated very quickly, but it meant that a huge amount of stuff was cut out of the finished novel because it didn't need to be there. But the fact that I'd spent so much time with these characters and, you know, spent so much time working with them and being in their heads and then being in my head, that I knew exactly how they'd react in any situation. It's like, you know, I can jump straight back into the character of Duncan straight away. I can jump straight back into the character of Aid, and I know that if Aid was here now, you know exactly how he'd be reacting to certain things, how he'd be reacting to Brexit. You know, he'd be sort of arguing with people about straight bananas and that sort of stuff. You know, he's that sort of person, and I know exactly how these characters work. And I think that the reason for that is because of all that extra stuff that was written. And
I couldn't agree more. I think with any character I write, if you don't know, you know, what supermarket they go to, what they buy when they were there, would they do the weekly shop, would they go in every other day, what newspaper do they buy, what pub would they drink in, what would they order, you know, I don't think you know your characters well enough. So it's really interesting to hear you say that. I do want to talk a bit about toxic masculinity though, because Lairies, well, I'm the Quarry, but Lairies is absolutely dripping in it, and it is great to explore, because something I love about Lairies is how you do get like the excitement, you get the violence, you get like the white knuckle look at life, but it also shows you what happens after it, shows the reflection on it. And I think literature is such an important part of looking at this, because it gives you that unique inner insight and voice in the head, as you said. But before we really chat about it, I just want to know, what do you mean when you say the phrase toxic masculinity?
Well, for me, it means the part of masculinity, and some people would say there's no such thing as toxic masculinity because all masculinity is inherently toxic. But for me, it's the part of masculinity that causes people to act in a boorish sort of way, that deliberately draws attention to themselves in order to put other people on edge and make you feel more powerful, basically. And that is precisely the type of person that I'm talking about in this book. You know, the sort of person who will stand by the bar hoping that you bump into them so that they've got an excuse to kick your head in, you know, or the sort of person who will, you know, make a comment to someone as they walk past, hoping they will rise to it. The type of person who will, you know, direct unwanted attention towards girls on a night out. The type of person that will grope girls on a night out, shout things at people. That is what I mean by toxic masculinity. And what I had noticed from going out, and I think it might be a kind of small town thing, but certainly going out where I come from, is that these types of people were everywhere. And on a couple of occasions, I was on the receiving end of it myself, you know, wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah.
Getting beaten up, basically, that sort of thing. And it really, the anger, I think, in this novel is real. You know, it really, really used to wind me up, and it used to piss me off. And I used to think, well, I'm not able to do anything about it. Wouldn't it be great if somebody was? And that's where that superhero element comes in, because, you know, there was something about going out for a night out where if you made it back home in one piece, you kind of felt a sense of achievement. You know, it was, you know, I mean, I remember when me and you were talking last week, and you were saying about walking past groups of guys, and you know, I know that that feeling very, very well. And that's what, for me, that's what I mean by toxic masculinity, this Larry, boorish behavior that's designed to draw attention to yourself and make you feel more powerful based on the fact that you're feeding off the reaction you're getting from others, in the sense that they're obviously uncomfortable with your behavior. That's who I'm going after in this book, those sorts of people, really.
Yeah. Did you ever find, trying to bring this kind of behavior out of your characters, that it kind of scared you that you're able to write this? Because I very much, we've spoken about this quite a lot, and you go to lengths to go like, these people do not represent me. This is a comment on, but this isn't me. But we still as writers have to put the words on the page. We have to have the ideas and so on. Did it ever scare you that you were able to come up with these justifications, these ideas, these reasonings, these acts, and that you had that inside of yourself?
I don't think that it did scare me. I don't think that's quite the right word.
Or surprise you, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Some of it was difficult to write. Some of it was difficult to write, and it's even more difficult to read it now, because, and this is an important thing really, because it was written quite a while ago. The time that I was writing a lot of these chapters was closer to the time that I'm discussing, whereas now, 2003, when the novel is set, it's not that long ago really, but it's such a different time that this novel might as well be a period piece. It's such a different time. And so reading some of it now, it's even more uncomfortable for me to read it than it was when I was putting it together. And I remember, because I did some creative writing classes, I did an MA up in Manchester, and a lot of the novel was written during those classes, and people in the class were looking at it. And I remember being quite worried about how people were going to react to it, but they actually reacted very well, and were part of the reason, that group of people from that MA class are part of the reason that I ended up carrying on with it. So I wouldn't necessarily say, but basically what my intention was, I suppose, was to make the violence brutal without being gratuitous, and to make the and to make it also quite funny, perhaps in a sardonic way, but at least funny without being frivolous. So it was kind of that balance of trying to get it right. Like, yeah, it's really brutal in this bit. But another thing that I wanted to do, of course, was to try and make the violence almost a bit slapstick. I didn't want it to be choreographed, because if you watch CCTV of a group of lads fighting in the street, you could play Benny Hill music over it. They're tripping over their own feet. They're throwing punches that aren't connecting. It's messy. It's just, and they're biting and ripping each other's shirts. And that's what I was trying to get across in the violence in the book. I didn't want it to be really slick and choreographed. I wanted it to just be ridiculous, which is what that type of behavior is anyway. So yeah, there was a lot of that going on. I was there's a very fine balance to be struck, I think.
Yeah. Just stepping away from the page quickly, what do you think just needs to happen with masculinity and men in general to make progress in tearing down these barriers, to kind of stopping this toxic masculine behavior, this, for you, this boorish behavior, and to try and, stop characters like Colbeck and Ade being needed or existing in society? Not a big question, but if you could solve that for us, that'd be swell.
Well, I have no idea how to solve it. I think that, it's kind of difficult for me to comment on what's going on at the moment. It strikes me, and I may well be wrong about it, but it strikes me that men are perhaps becoming more willing to discuss their feelings, which is, and it's that is Colbeck's undoing in this novel. The fact that he cannot discuss his own emotions in a way that is not that he doesn't feel is self-pitying. He can't do it. To him it's just like a no-go area. And I think that maybe guys are getting a bit better about talking about their own feelings. And I also think that people are becoming more willing to call out this sort of behavior, you know, the type of behavior that was very, very commonplace back in 2003 and that I saw a lot of. I don't go out clubbing anymore or go to bars, but I get the impression that people are more likely to not tolerate that sort of behavior. And I'm not just talking about girls not tolerating that sort of behavior. I'm talking about other guys. I think that people are more likely to call out that sort of behavior nowadays. Don't know why, but that's just how it seems to be.
What do you think Aidan Colbeck would make of that now in 2021, assuming we could go to, you know, bars and clubs and things? Do you think they'd be, you know, happy that more guys are, you know, verbally correcting each other, the behavior is reduced, or do you think they'd still be like, well, we're gonna have to try harder to get in a fight now?
Yeah, I think it may well be the latter, or they would find something else to ridicule about this new type of masculinity that's coming that we're seeing now. I don't really know, but what I do know is that this particular story, I don't really think it would work at any time other than 2003. Because what I did intend to do is I thought, again, because there were various points in time I thought the novel was finished. Then I'd leave it for a couple of years and then come back and end up tweaking it. And it just went on and on. And one of the things I thought was, should I make it a bit more current? Should I set it in 2012, for example, instead of 2003? Should I make it more contemporary, I guess? But yeah. What I started to think was, well, no, because it wouldn't work. I mean, can you imagine if Colbeck was sitting there constantly, you know, looking up his ex-girlfriend on Instagram and seeing what she was doing, and if Aid was having to go outside every time for a smoke or, you know, God forbid, a vape? You know, there's something about that time, that there's something about 2003 that this particular novel, it just sits in that time, you know. Yeah. And that was one of my reasons for setting it in that year. Or it wasn't my original reason, but it was my reason for not then updating it.
But there was also, because a lot of the security measures, which if, you know, you're coming out of lockdown, fresh, going to bars and clubs for the first time, you'd see multiple bouncers, CCTV, all of that, you know, scan your ID at the door as the norm. But that all comes about because of people like Colbeck and Aid and their violence.
Yeah, and, you know, social media. Yes, I don't think you would get away with that type of behavior. And actually, that's one of the reasons that they go on that road trip in the novel. So for people who haven't read it, there's a section where they go on a road trip, the three characters, Duncan, Colbeck, and Aid. And the reason that I put that in originally was because I thought, if they live in a small town that's got one high street, you know, like the town I came from, and you've got a few clubs, a few bars, you know, kebab shop, that sort of stuff. I thought that there's only a certain number of times that this group of people are going to be able to go out and get themselves in this sort of shit without, you know, being barred. So I had to get them out of their town, and that's where that road trip idea originally came from, you know.
Yeah. And it really does bring the novel alive, I found at that point. Not that it wasn't alive before, but it is, you know, that second point of no return. Okay, let's go.
And it's the point at which Colbeck, the rift, it's not really a rift, but the kind of difference of opinion between Colbeck and Aid starts to open up. Is on that road trip of Colbeck no longer seeing this violence as ideological and no longer seeing it as being you know, as being moral and being a vehicle for justice. That's the point at which he starts to realize that he just enjoys going out and fighting people for any reason, you know.
You say about time, place and times. I would donate good money to charity to see you write about Aidan Colbeck on a night out in Shoreditch in 2021, man.
Yeah.
I'd love to see what they make of that.
Maybe one day I will, you know, write a sequel. Who knows?
You say it, a lot of it, like it's a period piece. It works especially well in, like, you know, this early noughties era.
Yeah.
But if you're an 18-year-old lad, like, maybe, because I know you teach creative writing, some of your students, or, you know, maybe a son, nephew, brother of someone listening right now, if you put this book into the hand of an 18-year-old lad, what would you want them to take away from it?
Oh God, that's such a difficult question. What would I want an 18-year-old to take away from this novel? I
mean,
suppose.
think it out. I'm not going to let you off the hook.
No, man. Yeah, it's cool. I would. Two things for me. There are kind of two key elements of this novel, I think. The first one is that it's about understanding the consequences of actions and the way that any action has a ripple effect, and that's kind of what's going on in the book, and that theme is referred to a lot. But it's also about aspiration. It is about aspiration, especially Duncan, about this idea that there's a certain type of man, if you like, who is just totally disenfranchised and has just fallen through the cracks. There's a certain type of man who that has happened to, and for whatever reason, they don't really believe that they're ever going to make anything of their lives. They want some kind of excitement, and perhaps that's why they go out and get themselves into fights and whatever, and behave the way that they do. And I hope that even though it's a very, very bleak story, there is some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, in the sense that I hope that it encourages people to aspire to be whatever they want to be, really. And the reason, you see, it's weird now when I read it, because there's a sort of strange sense of melancholy to some of the chapters, especially Duncan. And that wasn't deliberate, but I know exactly where it came from, because when I wrote this book years ago, as I say, I wrote the majority of it, I was living with mates. First of all, I was living with my best mate, and then a group of us moved in together. And then there was a much wider circle of mates who were always staying over at that house at different periods in time. And there were always people around, and I was just doing any job that would pay the bills. My life was just about having a good time with my friends. But I think that, in fact, I know at the time I was starting to worry about that group of friends coming apart a bit, and people getting married, people having children, people moving away for work, all that sort of thing. And I was worried about being like Withnail at the end of the film, the one left behind. And I used to tease my mate about it when we lived together. And I think that I saw this novel as something that might potentially open the door to the next part of my life. And because I knew that the way I was living at the time wasn't going to go on forever. And I was sad about that. And I think that permeates those chapters a little bit, especially the Duncan chapters. And that's what I mean when I'm talking about aspiration, about wanting to get out of that, just wanting to get out of this monotonous cycle of your life. And because I knew that once that friend group started to spread apart, the other stuff that I was doing in my life wouldn't be enough to keep me, to keep me entertained,
Oh, tell me about it. I'm going to put you on the spot though. Is that to say you'd want a young lad to be like, enjoy it while it lasts? These are the good old days, enjoy them. Would it to be to start building for more now, because this isn't forever? Or are those two things mutually exclusive? Can it be both, man?
I think it can be both, because, I had a brilliant time writing this novel. I really did. But at the same time, I know that as I got further into it, I started to take it more seriously. And the reason that I started to take it more seriously is because I thought to myself, if this doesn't lead to something, then I'm going to end up bored. I'm going to end up feeling like a failure. Because the way that I was earning money at the time, the jobs that I was doing a series of very, very normal jobs, stacking shelves in Tesco, working as a cleaner in a school, working in a bookshop. And that was all great. And I loved it. But I loved it in the context of everything else that I was doing. And I knew that when that was taken away, it wouldn't be enough. It just wouldn't be enough. And I wouldn't feel like there was enough momentum. And so definitely when I was working on it, I was thinking, I hope that this is going to lead to something else. Which it did, but I didn't know that at the time, Yeah.
How long, just because you keep referencing it, and I've been trying to hold off as long as I can. How long was it between, pardon me, sort of starting on Lairies and then finishing a first draft to, meeting Influx? And because I think you said you sold the book last February.
It was
No.
around July of 2019, I think.
Okay.
I think the February thing comes from the fact it was meant to be out in February this year. But then it got delayed because of the pandemic.
Yeah, but just so kind of quickly as we sort of start to wind down, and also I find this just as another writer like fascinating. When I was still trying to get the core out in the world, I found hearing other writers' timelines and journeys fascinating and affirming that I wasn't an outlier and this thing takes a lot of hard work and a long time. When did you start working on Lairies, and how long did it take you to get from those initial pages written after work down the pub to that meeting with Influx, which set us on course for today?
Ages. So I started writing it in 2006. Then my computer was stolen, and me being me, of course, I hadn't backed it up because I was only 20 at the time or something. I wasn't thinking about backing up
Life before
my novel. Yeah, man. So then I had to start it again. I think the first draft of it was probably finished by around 2009, something like that, 2008. Then I sat on it. Then I sort of, usually while drunk, would sort of open it up on the laptop, mess about with it and put it away. And of course, I didn't really know how to. I mean, at the time, I'd never met anyone who'd. I don't think I'd met anyone who'd written a novel, let alone anyone who'd had a novel published. I didn't know what to do about it. And so very, very gradually it happened. And then I ended up getting an agent, Ivan, who is amazing and has done wonders for my confidence. He's a really cool guy. And then he sent it to Influx, and that's kind of how it worked. But I mean, I've been living with this novel for 14 or 15 years, a long time.
Yeah. You're going to miss it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I am. It's kind of, it's weird, sending those characters out into the world and knowing that now I can't change anything about what they do in that novel. I can't suddenly say, oh, actually, I wish this character had done that. And it got to the point where, and Gary, my editor, was very, very patient with me because I was changing things constantly, and it got to the point where I thought, I'm going to have to love this book for its flaws and not in spite of them. 10 years down the line, I'm going to open it and see a chapter or a sentence that I'm going to want to change, and I had to just draw a line under it, and I will miss it. Maybe one day I'll write a sequel. I don't know. We'll see.
It is the truth. It's like God bless editors. Just at that point where they go, okay, well, it's going to take this away from you now.
Yeah,
it's done. I promise, it's done.
Yeah. And then he'd get a message off me on WhatsApp saying, I've noticed something on page 364, line 12. There should be a comma there, that sort of thing. And it's just, you have to draw a line. But Influx and my agent and everyone at MMB Creative, everyone have been brilliant. Can't thank them enough.
Yeah. This is my last question. This is just something I love to ask other writers. This is my last question. So I'm going to do questions from the audience. After this would be a fantastic time to jump in. But I just want to know what your favorite copy edit you got back was, because mine was a correction on the spelling of the word fuckety.
Oh, okay.
And it was just the fact that either that or someone I saw on the timestamp, someone copy edited a sex scene at 10:30 in the morning. Like, they were my two. Do you have any like good things you look back at editing that just made you chuckle?
Yeah, there was. First of all, I got the word "sneaped" in there, which is kind of Stoke-on-Trent slang for being kind of, I suppose, caught out or somebody hurting your feelings. You would say, "I'm sneaped." And Gary, when he was editing it, hadn't heard that word, and we had to have a bit of a discussion about it. But there was one section in the, and it stayed in, which I was pleased about. But there was one section in the novel where I think I won't tell you what line it was, but Colbeck had a particularly grim experience, and Gary had highlighted it in the comments and just put, "We've all been there," and then like a little winking, emoji type thing. I was like, yeah, we had good fun editing it. It was good.
No, it's brilliant. I don't know if I don't have YouTube up. I don't know if someone wants to drop back in, but also, well, then to wrap up, so we do still have a few minutes. Is there anything you want to say about this book? This is your launch, your chance. You're introducing Lairies to the world. We've had a good chat. Is there anything you just want to say as you put your baby out there, man?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm quite overwhelmed already by the response that it has had. You know, I was very, very worried about it. And I didn't realize that there was this section of Instagram that people call Bookstagram, I think, where people, you know, review books and take nice photos of books with like a cup of coffee next to them and that sort of thing. And loads of those people, some of whom I believe are watching this now, have got in touch and said really cool things about the book and been very, very generous. And so I was very, very, because of the subject matter, especially now, I was very, very worried about how it would be received, because I was terrified that I would be viewed as endorsing the behavior of my characters rather than rather than ridiculing it, really.
So I don't want to interrupt you, but I said this to you when I went for my first meeting with Dialogue. All of my meeting notes were me defending the book, like me trying to justify how it fits into literary canon. Like, I do understand that feeling. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was kind of done really with what I was saying. I mean, it's just, I hope that people will read it and enjoy it, and I hope that it will make people think, and I hope that people will talk about it, and will see it as perhaps answering questions that personally I don't see addressed that much in fiction, really. I mean, I don't know if it's just because people aren't writing this type of stuff, you know. I mean, that's certainly how it seems to me, which is why when I read the Quarry, I was so taken by it, you know, and sent you a fanboy email. But you know, I just hope people read and enjoy it, and I hope people tell me what they think of it as well. You know, get in touch.
Yeah.
Well, on that note,
it's like magic.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm back.
Hey,
thanks so much, guys, for that discussion. It's really great.
Cheers, man.
Yeah, lots to chew on for those that have read the book and for those that haven't. So and to as my book seller, you know, I've got to do it. For those that haven't, the book is available on our website. We've still got signed copies, and we've just got a couple of moments left. And we've got a couple of questions from the audience on YouTube.
Right.
So the first is from James Sorrell Cameron. He asks, Keeping Britain Tidy came out in 2010. To what extent is Lairies a rewrite of that? And what has been changed / developed?
Okay. Well, James Sorrell Cameron is the reason I started writing. So I can't believe that he's here. That is awesome. Thank you. So yeah, Keeping Britain Tidy was an earlier version of this novel. Really, it was put out as part of a university project back in 2010, and then you know, again, as I said earlier, a case of me thinking that the novel was finished when perhaps it wasn't. And then I ended up revisiting it and adding more. I think the story is kind of very similar, really. You know, the characters are the same, but in the new version, the characters do more things. You know, the new version's considerably longer, and there's a lot more delving into the backstories of the characters, especially Colbeck, and answering the question as to how he's arrived at this point in his life where he feels the way that he does. So that's the main difference between the two.
Okay, great, thank you. Cool. And then from Matthew Colbeck, we have being a multi-voice narrative, the structure is very intricate. How do you approach structuring the novel in the face of effectively free writing in the initial stages? Yeah,
okay, so Matthew Colbeck, my best mate, who I named a character after. So yeah, as I said, when I was writing it, I was just writing the bits that interested me, you know, the fighting scenes, the dialogue scenes, that sort of stuff. And then subconsciously themes started to emerge. You know, I started to notice just when I was reading it through, which I tended to do every couple of months, bits that were being picked up in one section and then hanging over and then being picked up again later on. And so that's how those themes and those little threads started to come together quite organically and naturally, really. But then what I started to do is there are very, very subtle links between the different narrative strands that I don't think, most people would pick up on, but I just put them there for my own for my own amusement, really. And I think that the thing that I'm most proud about with this novel is the plot, the way that it fits together. I think that it is quite intricate, and it was very, very difficult to get it right. I remember summarizing each chapter on Post-it notes and moving them around and just trying to make sure that the information was drip fed in the correct way, so that I wasn't giving away too much too early, bearing in mind that the novel starts at the end, so the first page you already know what's going to happen, and then trying to just make it so that it was keeping people intrigued without telling them too much. It was very, very difficult.
Well, you've done a great job. So those post-it notes paid off. I think we got one question to close us out. And before I ask it, I just want to say thank you very much to Ben for doing such a great job chairing. It's,
thanks, man.
Really excellent questions.
Thank you.
So Planty85 wants to know what your issue is with straight bananas. I don't know if that's a toxic question.
No, it's not. I'll tell you exactly what that's all about. So Planty85 is my mate over in where you're living at the moment, man. Kansas, over in Kansas. And he set me the challenge of today's event of slipping the word banana in, which then led to my comment earlier about Aid talking about straight bananas. So there we go. So that's what Planty85 is talking about. It's a private joke. Thank you.
Well, on that esoteric note, encourage you to buy the book so you can find more Easter eggs. Straight, round, oval shapes. And thanks very much, guys. Congratulations to Steve.
Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah,
man.
See you all soon.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much.